Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in welcoming to the Gathering of Eagles stage Major General P.J. Johnson.
Both of those young majors are former execs. And if you've had enough execs work for you, you know you sometimes wonder, is the exec working for me or am I working for the exec? So I'm okay right now. They've been a delight to work with over this long haul. I know where you are. I've been there. Your orders are in your hands. Your household goods are packed. You're living out of a suitcase. Kids are ready to go, chomping at the bit. And you're sitting there thinking, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Been there. Thanks for being here. Two things I've learned so far, listening to the other two, General Horner and Beast, is one, is that the 10% rule is in effect. If you're not familiar, any story with 10% truth is fair game. And after listening to these two this morning, 10% rule is in effect. The second is, General Horner, the CSAR question this morning was a really good question. And his observations, I thought were spot on about where we were with the CSAR force and AFSOC and the service roles and responsibilities, et cetera. Thought all of that was spot on. But then he got to the end and he was talking about some rescue involving F-16s, and I thought, really? After 26 years, he can't use the words A-10 in public? Has it lasted that long? You may or may not know, his son John is a 2-star in the Air Force, longtime A-10 pilot, Horn Dog. We go way back. That was a bitter pill for General Horner to swallow back in the day. Horn Dog wanted to be an A-10 pilot, and Dad didn't care for it. And friends of the family would periodically see Mary Jo and General Horner and say, so how's John doing? He died in a motorcycle accident. After Desert Storm, General Horner obviously got his 4th star, went off to Air Force Space Command, and those of us in the tactical community kind of lost touch. We didn't know where he was. And we'd see Horn Dog at the weapons school or wherever say, Horn Dog, what's going on with your dad? He died in a motorcycle accident. What both General Horner and Beast talked about this morning about where we were in the 80s, pre-Desert Storm, is so true. We trained so hard. We were at Red Flag at least once a year. We were at Air Warrior normally twice a year. Green Flag every other year. We'd take 24 jets on a squadron. We go to Europe for 6 months, even though we're sitting in Myrtle Beach. Go to the detachments over in Germany. We were constantly taking 4 and 6 airplanes and just going off to an Army fort for a week. I was gone 30% of the time before we ever got to Desert Storm, but it was training. And it was intense training. It was hard training. ORE, phase 1s and phase 2, every quarter, whether you needed it or not. Oh, that was a root canal. We trained hard. But as Beast mentioned about stealth, is this stealth really going to work? We ask the same questions. Are our tactics really the right ones? Is our training really good? Are our systems really? You think about it. The F-16, the F-15C, the A-10, the Strike Eagle were all unbloodied. All of them. Now, the Israelis have flown the F-15, got it. But for us, those were unbloodied systems. And we didn't know. The J-STARS was a developmental experimental system that got shoved into the war. So we wondered if all of those were going to work. Here's the other thing that was important, that is an important difference. When I was a wing commander at DM 8 years ago, one of the things we did is we trained in UA-10 pilots. And I could walk into either one of those squadrons on any day and walk around and say, all the IPs with combat experience, raise your hand. All of them. Without fail. Without fail, every A-10 instructor pilot was a combat veteran. Some with multiple tours, one of which had won a McKay Trophy for the outstanding flight of that year. So I had some long ball hitters as instructor pilots that are captains. When we deployed to Desert Storm, Desert Shield, when the squadron went, when the wing went, our combat experience was Sandy Sharp, the wing commander. Hammer and Hank Hayden, the director of operations. Rick McDowell, commander of a sister squadron. and Ron Kurtz, our ops officer, who'd been an HH-53 driver in Southeast Asia and then transferred to fixed wing. 4. So we were all looking at each other thinking, I hope we've got this right. The other thing that we wondered about is what we were going to do. We're the CAS pilots. We do close air support. That's what this is about. And then we discovered as part of the war plan, there's not going to be any ground fight for some number of weeks. So we're saying, what are we going to do? Well, as you read the notes in General Horner's portion of the book, he was not going to leave the Iraqi Army untouched. So our job was to go in and attrit the Iraqi Army. So we started day one, attritting the Iraqi Army. And that's what we did. As you saw, I didn't go with the squadron. As we were getting, the whistle finally blew and we were going to deploy out of Myrtle Beach. Squadron Commander Rick Schatzel said, come with me. Walking back to his office, he sits down and says, the squadron's going to Saudi Arabia and you're not. Get in your car and go to Vegas. And he was right. I hated it. It was gut-wrenching, but it was the right thing because the squadron went to Saudi Arabia and started filling sandbags. And I went to Saudi, I went to Nellis there for that time, graduated, went home, 2 days, kissed our new daughter Jessica, had Christmas with Tricia, and Christmas Day, I went to Dover, and then waited 2 weeks for a C-5 that was flyable, so I could get over to King 5. Sorry, those were C-5As. I thought I'd get to Dover and see an empty ramp, and the entire fleet was sitting on the ramp. So I show up in country on New Year's Day, and my squadron mates never let me forget it because they'd been there for the whole thing. 2 weeks later, the war starts, and I don't do CAS. I don't even do the interdiction of treating the Iraqi forces. My first combat sortie is offensive counter-air. What? As Beast alluded to, the Pavlos the night before had taken the Apaches in and they had knocked a corridor down for early warning radar sites. We continued doing that over the next few days. So we were going up along the border and knocking out early warning radars or their comm nodes, just knocking down the picket fence all the way across southern Iraq. So I thought, I've never done OCA before. Never even trained to do OCA before. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute. You want me to hit a target that doesn't move, and you're going to give me pictures of what the target looks like. I got this. And so that's what I did for the first couple of days. The first thing I want to talk about is really the flexibility of air power. We talk about it, but here's what you may not understand. It's just how good we are at it. We're so good at it, we take it for granted. General Horner alluded to it when he's out at NTC and all of these disparate units show up, Guard, active, different services, they show up and they're suddenly got to create a force the next day, and they do, because they've been doing red flag for years. We take for granted the flexibility that we have, but it's ingrained in us. Somebody said once that the only truly American music form is jazz, and jazz is fundamentally improvisation. We do jazz. Doesn't mean it's not disciplined. Doesn't mean that people don't have parts. Hello, JC. Hi, Melissa. Just had a flashback. Everyone has roles to play, but you improvise along the way. And the first experience with that was when the Scud Hunt kicked up. And everybody was frightened about the Scuds, and we're all doing Scud hunting. Well, Scud hunting is armed recce. Scud hunting is armed recce, and we trained to do armed recce. CSAR. We had trained to do CSAR. The A-10 was the fixed wing legacy of the A-1 Sky Raider from Southeast Asia. And there's nothing an A-10 pilot wanted more than on Friday to be able to slap on a Sandy 1 name tag and go out and fly a Sandy. Yeah, Trash is giving me the look. That was the heat, to be a Sandy guy. But CSAR was in trouble in the United States Air Force. The Air Rescue Service, we had a detachment at Myrtle Beach, a couple of H-3s, and we had a detachment, but they were on a slippery slope because Mother Mac was not taking care of them. And the force was dwindling and the force was in trouble. Meanwhile, AFSOC is standing up with incredibly capable Pavlos, MH-53Js, that are just amazing machines, but we weren't on the same page. Their concept was about infill and exfil, night, covert, precise, known location. We grew up in a day CSAR task force where, well, here's the analogy. There's a different way to raid a farmer's hen house. One way is to sneak under the back fence, sneak into the hen house without waking anybody up, grab 3 of the chickens and leave and nobody knows. That's a good way to raid a hen house. Our perspective in the A-10 was we go crashing through the front door, hold a knife at the farmer's throat and say, I'm about to raid your hen house. You got any problems with that? And that was the CSAR task force. And that was really born out of the A-1 Sky Raiders. It was, we dare you to mess with us. Talked to an old guy, Tommy Lyon, A-1 Sky Raider. I asked, what happened when the SA-7 showed up? How did you deal with the SA-7s? We were piston driven. Didn't bother us. So I said, how did you deal with the SA-7 threat? Did you bring in the big strikes? Did you bring in the F-105? I said, no, no, no. The SA-7s were for us. CSAR got to be a psychological event as much as a tactical event. And that's the way we approached it in the A-10. Well, again, that's a mismatch from what the payloads were doing. But nevertheless, we found ourselves doing it. Didn't want to do it. Our philosophy was, if I'm going to get up at 04:30 and be awake all day, let me fly the airplane. If you're not going to let me fly the airplane, let me stay in my rack. CSAR alert, you're getting up, pre-flighting an airplane, and then sitting on your hands all day. So we weren't keen on doing that. But what we discovered on the CSAR mission when I flew it, 8.8 hours, long story, not enough time here, I learned of the power of the Sandy call sign. When you check down on the radio and you talk to Yukon, the AWACS, and I said, AWACS, this is Sandy 5-7, I need a tanker. Where do you want him? Yukon, Sandy 5-7, we need an Eagle cap. Roger, 5 minutes, he's on the radio. Sandy 5-7, this is Eagle 1, where do you want me? I don't know, I'm just a dumb hog guy. You just set up the bar cap where you need to. But nobody said no to Sandy because we remembered. We had enough of the Vietnam guys left that we remembered what CSAR was from their day. And everybody wanted to play, really wanted to play in a CSAR, and nobody would back away from the task. Not only are we flexible, we put teams together faster than anybody. Call sign, frequency, rendezvous point, tasker, code word, whatever, off to the races. Off we go. And we did that every day. We do it all the time now. It's embedded in what we do. I'm coming off the survivor's location. I've overflown my bingo. I'm not going to make it to RR, the divert base way out west. And I said, AWACS, I need the tanker. Roger, your nose, 126 miles. No, I need the tanker to come to me. Calls the tanker, 15,000 feet, 5th day of the war, broad daylight, wading into Iraq, comes bebopping in. I get on him and he's still pointed north. Why don't we turn south now? 3 times he comes inside Iraq to get me. Never bats an eye. On the battle damage day, talk about that in a minute, I'm coming out with a beat up airplane. I'm stuck below the weather at about 6,000 feet. Weather's above me with a messed up airplane. And I realize right fuel tank got ruptured. It's messed up. Fuel gauges, none of them make sense. Nothing's adding up right. Just based on the wing that fuel my wingman's got. What's going on? Okay, let's get a little bit of gas to get home. Call for a tanker. Weather's layered all the way up to the 30s. The only tanker without chicks in tow, again, is a KC-10 sitting at 30,000 feet. And AWACS again says, emergency, we need fuel right now. Here's where he is, 6,000 feet AGL behind him. And so a KC-10 rolls it up and slices through the stack. Just comes rolling through. And then I'm sitting there trundling along with a boot full of rudder, smoking along at 190 knots. And I see a KC-10 sliding by about a mile off my starboard side. And I say, well, that's not going to work. And I see him start to roll his flaps. Okay, been to this rodeo. It's time for A-10 public humiliation while he tries to get slow. That doesn't work. I see him roll his slats. Yeah, more public humiliation for the A-10s. KC-10 getting slow enough. And then I see him throw down his gear at 6,000 feet. I said, now I've never seen that before. And then he gets himself slow. We stabilize, match speeds. He sucks the gear up, and then I pull behind him. I've got an awesome letter, handwritten letter from the boomer to his father, who is a retired colonel. And it's a 6-page handwritten letter about that mission from the boomer's perspective. It's priceless. It's priceless. And And I snuggle up behind the tanker, and tankers now, so I can have a little bit of throttle, tankers at 175 knots on a KC-10. KC-10 drivers, anybody volunteering to do that one? So his deck angle is such, and my problems are such that the boom is out of limits. The boom is out of its envelope, so the boom has to go on override. I'm out of right hydraulics, so I can't latch. So he's got a stiff boom refuel. So I snuggle up behind him. I'm at a 15 degrees of left bank because all the damage is on the right. Full left boot of rudder, can't latch, and he stiff booms me, refuels me long enough to get enough gas, and then I back off and off we go. We can be tribal in our Air Force. Sometimes that's pretty good. We like to talk smack about each other. When I was at the weapons school, whenever we would sit down with our bros in the F-15 division, there was always a bet. How long will it take before the Viper bashing begins? And then it goes back and forth. You know, a friend of mine, Mobile Holmes, now the ACC commander, always talks smack about the hog. Hog popping is the sport of kings. We get very tribal, and usually it's good. Sometimes it gets to have a little bite to it. But I would tell you in the storm, there weren't many tribes because nobody backed away. Nobody questioned whether or not they were going to play. Nobody wondered if they wanted to play. Great conversation between an OV-10 Bronco and one of my squadron mates, Greg Henderson. The Bronco's up in eastern Kuwait working below the weather. And we don't like being below the weather because we're highlighted, probably about 7,000 feet. Hendo's holding just south of the border, talking to the OV-10 Bronco, trying to figure out what's the threats, what's the threat level like, how big is it, how intense is it, where's the AAA, where are the SAMs, is it good enough to come in? And finally the Bronco says, look, I'm in here, are you coming or not? Be right there. Everybody's willing to do whatever it took. We put teams together quickly, and we are incredibly flexible. It's in our DNA, and don't ever let it roll out of our DNA. Be careful about letting tactics fall out of the playbook just because they're not the newest fad. Sometimes tactics do need to be updated, and in the age of stealth, they get updated significantly. But be leery of throwing away old tactics, because the CSAR I executed, we pulled a page straight out of Southeast Asia. I used a daisy chain, I used a hover cover, I did UHF electronic search. You could have slapped a propeller on the front of my airplane and put an A1 Skyraider in it, and he would have known exactly what we were doing. And oh, by the way, that Pavlo MH-53 started out life as an HH-53. And I've often wondered how much Southeast Asia time that MH-53 had on it. Tom Trask, by the way, was the aircraft commander on that airplane and just retired as Lieutenant General Tom Trask out of SOCOM. Great guy. Learned a few other things. One was I had to spend 2 weeks in Riyadh in the black hole. And one night I stumbled into the ops floor just talking to the A-10 duty officers about the taskings. As I stumbled in, I thought something's different here. There's a level of intensity that I'm not accustomed to seeing at 2 o'clock in the morning. And bottom line, it was the night of Kafji. And what I saw that night is just a slick wing captain I saw the JFAC realized. I saw, because of theater-wide command and control and the authority of a JFAC, I saw mass on demand. If you don't know the story, it's when the Iraqis tried to assemble some sort of armored force and move on a village down on the Iraq-Kuwaiti border right in the corner of southeastern Kuwait, and J-Stars caught it with a moving target MTI radar. And everything fell in on them. F-15Es tasked for the east, never mind, re-roll them to the west, or vice versa. A-10's going to the kill box, nope, send them to Kafji. Where are the B-52s? They're about an hour south, re-roll them, they're going to Kafji. The theater's worth of air power fell on Kafji because a JFAC had the authority and a JFAC had the command and control capability to make it happen. That was an awesome thing to watch from the safety of the command center. The other thing is, as was noted this morning, General Holder noted this morning, the Iraqi Army sitting on the front was a conscript army. If you looked across the Kuwaiti front and the Kuwaiti along the Saudi border, starting on the east and going west, That was the Iraqi infantry force, and that was the conscript army extending on to Saudi Arabia. The Republican Guard was sitting north of them. The reason the Republican Guard was north of them is to keep them from deserting, because they didn't want to be there. First of all, Beast and others like him had disconnected them from their higher headquarters starting on night one. Those poor guys on the front had no clue what was going on, because there was no C2, there was no IADs, there were no commanders in the know as what was going on. But because the Republican Guard was behind them, they were stuck. Nobody to surrender to. So what I saw when the ground fight started are a couple of things. First of all, I flew 3, count them, 3 close air support sorties. That's it. I employed ordnance on one of them. 2 notable ones. One, we're supporting the Armored Cav Regiment. And as I was talking to my Army brother last night, it's when an Armored Cav Regiment was an absolute beast. It was a division without the logistics tail, and they could move. All they were doing was pulling Iraqis out of their slit trenches. All they were doing was surrendering. That's all they were doing. Nobody was firing a shot. And I'm supporting them up here talking to the ALO on the radio, another weather deck. I'm down at about 3,000 feet. And the slit trenches are this way, the second ACR and the Bradleys are moving this way, and we're holding back here, doing this little figure 8 parallel to the flot, watching what's going on. And all the Iraqis were just thrilled to surrender. There are stories about MPs taking a roll of concertina wire and filling an area about half the size of the auditorium, putting a couple hundred of Iraqis in, giving them a pallet full of MREs and say, don't go nowhere. And they come back in 8 hours, and there's 500 Iraqis inside the concertina wire. So these guys are surrendering, and I'm sitting here looking at this. This is so cool. Man, I'd love to get a picture of this. So I get this brilliant idea. I'm going to call up my IR Maverick, and I'm going to turn on my HUD. I got 30 minutes of videotape, and I'm going to film this. And so I peel back about 4 miles, and I turn inbound with my Maverick called up, my IR Maverick, and I'm looking up here. And you can see the little Iraqi stick figures coming out on the IR scene. You can see the Bradleys coming around. Hey, this is really cool. And then suddenly I see the Bradleys' rooster tails of sand kick out, and they go accelerating around, and I look up, and all the Iraqis are running. Turn away, and I called the ALO. I said, did I do that? He said, yeah. They're kind of scared of you guys. We'd appreciate you not doing that again. Got it. So please understand, when General Horner talks about don't draw too many lessons about Desert Storm, let's not draw too many lessons about the Army that we faced. It was a conscript Army that largely did not want to be there. Secondly, didn't understand what was going on around them, was totally disconnected from their higher headquarters, and were really welcome for the opportunity to surrender to somebody instead of running into the Republican Guard at their 6 o'clock. So let's keep that in mind. The other thing about the cast fight was the day I was supporting the Brit Armored Division, the Desert Rats, talking to this magnificent Brit ground fact. We give you a PAR to the target. But on this day, again, if you remember, Saddam had lit all the Kuwaiti oil wells on fire, creating this huge natural disaster. And with the normal weather patterns, that smoke blew through Kuwait and then got pushed out into the Gulf. But on this day, the weather backed up, the winds shifted, and it was pushing back into Kuwait and into eastern Saudi Arabia, eastern Iraq. And this was a scuzz layer, maybe 100 feet thick, that kind of hugged the ground. And you could look straight down through the cloud, through the oil, and see the ground. But if you got any lateral positioning, you can't see anything. So John Whitney and I, we have to duck down below this stuff. And so we're working 100 to 200 feet AGL. We think the deck is about 300 feet, maybe a mile viz. So Whit's having to stay pretty close. And we're coming up just to the leading edge of the Brit flot, and he's saying the tanks are right over here, and we're getting the clearance, and we're shooting Mavericks into these Iraqi T-55s. We call them a spike Maverick. The joke is that you'd fly over the tank and scrape the Maverick off your pylon as you flew over him. The motor's still burning on the Maverick as it hits. So these are spike shots. And I'd fly, and as I'd pull off, I'm puking flares out of my airplane. I'm about 100 to 200 feet, I don't know. And Whit says, PJ, you're bouncing flares off their heads. And just like B says, 15 to 20 Iraqis in the middle of the desert, clustered together, are doing this to my A-10 as it goes by. Again, they didn't want to be there. The other point was those tanks were empty. What we had done with precision-guided munitions, first of all, PGM showed up in Southeast Asia. So we were using PGMs in Southeast Asia, but often against operational targets, bridge abutments, railroad viaducts, that sort of thing. We, and again, even in Desert Storm, you're going against IOCs and IOCs and the AT&T building and operational strategic targets. We were using PGMs on the battlefield against vehicles. Well, we had always trained to do that with Mavericks. I take umbrage when people say the A-10 was not a PGM shooter in Desert Storm. We shot more Mavericks than anybody else by a long shot. And the Maverick was a PGM dating back to the 70s. We had been plinking tanks for weeks before the F-111 started plinking tanks with LGBs. So we had been shooting tanks day after day after day after day and night after night after night. And what they'd figured out was an armored vehicle is not protection. An armored vehicle is a coffin. And I think that's had long-term impact. My opinion, why does ISIS run around in Toyota trucks with kids in the back end? Because they don't have the guts to get into an APC or a tank. Because we can fix that problem. The opponent knows not to mass on the battlefield. The opponent knows not to gather vehicles into a concentration. The opponent knows to bury himself into the civilian populace. The opponent knows to drive vehicles that look like civilian vehicles, because if it's an armored force, we know how to fix that problem. And I think we demonstrated that in Desert Storm. One of the questions that typically gets asked up here is about leadership lessons. And I'll go ahead and answer that now. As you go out and you assume positions of leadership, somewhere along the line, you're going to have to decide how much leash do you give your folks. How tight do you hold the leash, and how loose do you let the leash run? The answer is it depends. And this isn't just about aviation. Security forces, this is about your cops. Battlefield airmen, it's about your ETACs and your ground facts that may be displaced from your location. How much leash do you give them? Is the example I give from Sandy Sharp, and he was mirroring the guidance from General Horner. We got into a point with the A-10 when we were trying to attrit the Iraqi Army that we were strafing too much. And when we started strafing, we got stupid, including me. We do repeated passes with the strafe, and high angle strafe on an A-10 is an energy losing maneuver. It's like doing a clover leaf in an old T-37. Each leaf gets lower. And we do a high angle strafe pass and shoot, you come up, you get slow, and you roll in a little bit lower. Next pass, you roll in a little bit lower, and before you know it, you get bagged. And so guys were getting shot strafing. And so Colonel Sandy Sharp finally said, done. There will be no more strafing. And telling an A-10 guy that he's not going to strafe anymore is like taking away breakfast. You got to be kidding me. But here was his intent. We started the fight with 144 A-10s at King Fahd. And his intention was to go to the ground fight with 144 A-10s. And every morning as you walk in, dark 30, you go into the squadron, the first thing you do is read the battle staff directives. What's the latest guidance? What are the latest spin changes? Is there anything? And that's when we got those restrictions. You're not going to strafe. Reserve the IR Mavericks for the night flyers, or all releases are going to be of 10,000 AGL, whatever it is. And it just felt so constraining, so constraining. And then we walk in the day of the ground fight start, and we flip the page, and it's like all restrictions are lifted. You will fly as low as required. You will stay in the target area as long as required. And you will fly in any weather you deem suitable as the flight lead to execute your mission. And that's an example of there's a time to have a leash and there's a time to let the leash run. And Colonel Sharp, he turned the leash loose. And in fact, and this is a story I've been told, I can't verify its authenticity, but there was a really bad weather day, part of the day, and Sandy Sharp put us on weather hold. He just put the wing on weather hold. We're not flying, it's too bad up there. And I'm told there was a brief phone call from Riyadh And Sandy Sharp was instructed to let the captains figure that out. Is that true? Get your ass in the air was the quote. The point was, let the captains figure it out. The leash was off because we were there to do whatever was required for our coalition and our ground brethren. I agree that we need to be careful how many lessons we take from Desert Storm. But what we did learn, in my opinion, is one, I think air power came of age. I think the promise of air power, or what sometimes was the overpromise of air power, was in many ways realized. I think the necessity for an air component commander and for theater-wide C2 was made manifest. But at the same time, we remember who we were fighting. We were not fighting the A team, and depending on their capability, we weren't even fighting the B team. So let's be careful of the lessons we walk away from it. But here's a pitch to you. I like reading David McCullough.